What's going on, everyone? So last month, Vital MTB had the chance to head down to Colorado Springs, Colorado to visit RockShox and discuss their new automatic suspension platform, Flight Attendant. During our time there, we had the chance to sit and talk with RockShox Brand Manager, John Cancellier, and RockShox Electrical Engineer, Joe Schoolcraft, to discuss what it took to develop Flight Attendant, how the system works to analyze both rider and terrain inputs, and where they see this technology going in the future. So go ahead and have a listen, and hopefully this will answer any questions you have about the Flight Attendant system.
All right, guys, well, we just finished 2 days of riding Flight Attendant, and now kind of dive a bit more into the details and actually a bit of the backstory. I think is maybe the most important part.
Yeah.
So kind of like as I rewind this project, so as we kind of thought what we wanted to do and why we wanted to make an automatic suspension system, if you think of vehicles that go off-road, a bicycle, a mountain bike is kind of a unique thing, right? So we are the predominant weight of the vehicle versus, say, a motorcycle or four-wheeler or anything like that. And so forever there's been the need for bicycle suspension to be able to add some level of support or climbing efficiency for the bicycle, right? We outweigh the bike, and so we're trying to get the suspension to give us a bit of efficiency or support to get us up the hill. And we've done that numerous ways over the years: switches, knobs, levers, remotes, cables, all that kinds of things. And it's always been clear that having that additional compression support is beneficial, right? The bike climbs better, you feel like you're using less energy to go up the hill. But the problem is people either don't know when to use the knob or the lever, or they use them and forget to turn them off for the downhill. Everybody's done that. I've done that. I've been working in suspension for 20 years. I've definitely forgot to flip the switch, and you've ridden the downhill, you're like, that was terrible.
Yeah.
So kind of thinking through Flight Attendant, we wanted to add the efficiency that comes with that additional compression support, but without the rider having to be involved, right? We want the rider to just hop on the bike and go for a bike ride, and the bike's gonna do the rest. And that really, at a most basic level, is what Flight Attendant is doing, right? It's adding that additional efficiency, and the rider doesn't have to do anything. They just hop on the bike and go. And as I kind of look back at this, an interesting side note is, like, I've personally been working on this project for over 7 years. It's not that it's taken us 7 years to get here, but it's taken us 7 years to get to a place where we feel like we've got it right. And a couple things have happened along the way, right? So we basically started this project when we were working on ETAP. So the original wireless road drivetrain, right, is when we kind of kicked this thing off, and knowing, like, hey, this is cool technology, we want to apply it to something other than derailleurs. We want to add it to suspension. So that was kind of when we started. And really all of that wireless and electronic kind of knowledge and background that SRAM's gained in all that time is what allowed us to be here today showing you Flight Attendant. Like, there's no way we could have the system that you rode for the last 2 days without access.
Yeah.
No way, right? That is what makes all of this possible, but it's also kind of taking access to the next level, right? Before, we were replacing cable and housing with, your derailleur or something like that, replace it with a battery and a controller and some motors, same with the dropper post, but now we're actually using that wireless connectivity to allow the parts to talk together. So that was kind of a big part of the development here. So as we think about the system, we knew we wanted to have front and rear, and that was pretty clear early on, having worked them together. And there were a couple key milestones in the project, the questions we needed answers, and kind of big aha moments, if you will. So the first one, pretty early, we were debating back and forth between a 2 and a 3 position system. And really, we rode both. We had prototypes of both. We went on a test trip and rode both. And it was so clear that having that third position, that pedal position, which we talked about a ton over the last couple days, that was kind of game changer, right? It's like open and lock is cool, but having that pedal position, which you end up spending a bunch of time in, is really useful. So that was a big one, right? Kind of deciding that we wanted to do 3 position, and then that drove a bunch of the design from there of how the system would develop. The other kind of big one was wanting to get the rider to be a part of the inputs, right? So we're sensing what's going on the trail with the fork and the shock, but adding that pedal sensor really allowed us to kind of make the system unique in that we are listening to you guys. We're listening to all of us as we're riding. Your pedal input is such a big part of what's going on the trail. And then now we can use that information in the system to make better decisions, right? So those were kind of two key moments in like the development of Flight Attendant, was really like that 2 to 3 position. 3 was the clear winner. And then we rode that, and then we hacked in basically a cat-eye cadence sensor into the system, wired it in, and it was like, oh yeah, huge difference. Keep moving forward. How do we keep adding, you know, that pedal input into the system? And that's a lot of what Joe worked on, was really refining all those sensors together. So, you know, as you guys have found out, the 3-position system does have a ton of benefit on the trail, and so we're super stoked on where we ended up with this. And there's a bunch of other technology that's kind of a part of Flight Attendant that we'll get into a little bit later. But, you know, we wanted to make sure that when we launched this, it really was like our flagship, our best of the best suspension that RockShox can make. And it just happens to be electronically actuated, right? With no, nothing else needed. So yeah, those were kind of some big moments in the development of this thing.
Sweet. Yeah, that, well, we didn't really dive much into like the cadence sensor, kind of how that interacts with, you know, your suspension. I don't know if you guys want to like start with that and kind of go into like each individual piece, because there's more or less 3 pieces here all kind of talking to each other. Yep. Making things happen.
Yeah, you can hit it at a high level, Joe.
Yeah, so, you know, the pedal sensor is the human input into the system. And without that, I feel like the bike would not know what the rider actually wants. So whenever you're not pedaling, there's no reason to have your suspension be firm, right? But when you are pedaling, that lets the bike know, hey, we need to be more efficient in this scenario. So basically what that's doing is the pedal sensor is constantly trying to make the bike be more efficient, and the bike is sensing the terrain to determine when it's appropriate to do that. So it's kind of like the pedaling input is fighting to make the system more efficient and more firm, and the terrain input's fighting to make it more open. And between that there's a tension between those two. And, you know, the tricky part is finding the right balance between those two different things that are in tension. And but at a high level, that's really what it is it makes the bike so much more predictable, because it has that human element to it of listening to the rider and what they might want.
Very cool. Huh. I feel like there's definitely a few moments even riding that was so a little bit noticeable, for sure. How do you guys kind of decide where that balance is between, you know, rider input and trail input, and then is there any way for people to like adjust sort of that, or is it more like a preset you guys have found that is working well?
So,
or is that where you kind of get your rider bias settings, is adjusting all of that?
That's so each bias setting that we have, which adjusts, you know, how firm the algorithm is going to try to make things or how open it's going to try to make things. When we were designing those, we really tried to get inside different types of riders' heads. And so when we were designing like the bias -2, I tried to picture like the guy in the office or the gal in the office who liked riding bias -2, who I knew would like that, and try to really put myself in their shoes. And you know, we as a team really worked hard to be a picture. Okay, in this scenario, this trail scenario, if I were a -2 rider, what would I want to happen with my pedaling and with the bike doing open or lock or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And then same goes for like, I would talk to people who were kind of more like the more aggressive, like the +1, +2 side of things. And I would try to picture, okay, in this same scenario, how would I want the bike to respond? And so really getting to know each test rider that we had and going on rides with them and like understanding how they think and what they want the bike to do really helped us develop each of those 5 bias settings to where you have a setting really for everybody, in my opinion. And that's kind of how we found the balancing points between, you know, how much does the pedal sensor affect things versus how much does the terrain affect things.
Yeah, and Joe's being super modest here. He spent literally hundreds of hours out riding all of this and basically tweaking the knobs, right? Like, let's turn the pedal sensor up, let's turn the pedal sensor down, let's see what it feels like with all of those kind of inputs maxed or minned out, right? And we literally spent time riding in all those settings to find what you rode today in the last 2 days. And that really just took time and miles. Yeah. And lots of effort from Joe to get us there. So It really was. We tried all the variables, and what you rode is what we feel to be the optimum for now. Will it be for always? No.
Yeah.
But for now, we feel like we kind of hit the sweet spot with the 5 bias settings and kind of where the system is as a whole. We think we've kind of got all the bases covered.
Yeah, I mean, I think even between Johnny and I, kind of like the biases that we settled on, kind of went to show myself that like there is a little bit of something for everybody. And you know, you have options within there, even for each rider, or even like the terrain you're riding and all that.
Yeah, I definitely noticed the pedal sensor like pretty early on, and kind of tried to like get it to actuate by either stopping pedaling or picking it up and seeing how it would react. So it was interesting to try the different settings with the two.
Yeah, definitely.
You guys want to pick up pieces and touch on things that look cool?
Joe, background, did music, that was combining science and art. Feels like he's bringing that shit into this custom shit.
Sure, yeah.
I didn't hear anything about wrestling.
Oh yeah, I was wrestling a lot of bikes out there.
Jason, ask him about his background.
Yeah, can you give us like a little bit of insight into your background and kind of being with RockShox and developing Flight Attendant?
Yeah, so it all started when I was 4 years old. Just kidding, but actually kind of seriously though. So actually, my mom bought me a violin when I was 4 years old, and I started playing violin. I still play violins to this day. It's how I met my wife. Like,
oh, cool.
Big part of my life, yeah. So picked up a guitar when I was 13, really got into guitar, taught myself how to play piano. So music's always been a big part of my life. I actually went to school for acoustical engineering and minored in electrical engineering. So acoustical engineering is actually like the study of vibration and how sound propagates and how vibration propagates, which doesn't sound like it have anything to do with the bike, but funny enough, you know, what you see on the trail is vibration, right? So, you know, I spent the early part of my, you know, all through college, I used to work for a guitar pedal company, and so I'm constantly tweaking things with sound, and it's very much like knowing the science behind the art and the art behind the science kind of thing. You're constantly blending those two. Having that background of like me being able to play my guitar and hear something and somebody would say, oh, that sounds a little brittle or a little harsh. I'm like, okay, I need to roll 4K down. So it's like in my head, you can take the translation of, oh, it feels brittle, it sounds brittle, and you can turn a knob, you know which knob to turn to make it not sound like that and to make it sound the way you want it to. Oddly enough, same thing on a mountain bike. You go out and you start riding, you're like, oh, I was getting a lot of feedback, it felt harsh through my hands there. And same thing, it's like, okay, it feels harsh to the hands, so they probably don't want the fork and pedal there. Let's put the fork in open. And actually there's a time JC and I were on a trip together and we were blasting down this kind of double wide track and we're pedaling, and we were in pedal mode, and the fork was in pedal mode, shock was in pedal mode, and JC's like, yeah, it's just really blowing out my hands. And it's like, cool, if we could figure out how to open the fork in that scenario, it'll make the suspension ride a lot better in that setting. And so that's what we did. You know, we looked at the data and figured out how to do it. But again, it's the translation of like the human element of like the feeling of riding a bike and translating it into a technical, like, you know, hard code kind of thing, you know? So yeah, having the music background, playing guitar and all that stuff and running sound all really helped a lot with just understanding, conceptualizing how to take the trail feel and turn it into a kind of a technical code kind of thing. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
That's pretty unique, for sure.
It's pretty fortunate to have had that, but it's pretty cool.
It's everything in between there that I don't understand what you did.
And that's okay. That's okay.
I don't
want to tell you that. I want to keep my job. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as far as riding it and whatnot, that's probably not too important. So
yeah,
we're feeling the end result of it all.
Yeah, good.
Sweet. Yeah, let's touch on different pieces.
Yeah,
of it.
for sure. Let me grab a couple stuff here. So, you know, a couple things early on with the system. We knew when we were designing these parts that we wanted to have, we kind of call it the wet side and the dry side, right? So the wet side being the damper full of oil, the electronical components being the dry side, right? And we can build this in one assembly line in our factory. We can build this in a different clean room that's made for electronics. And then we can put them together on the assembly line, and it makes it easier for our manufacturer. But also what it does is it means the damper, the fork damper, can be serviced like a normal fork damper, right? Like once this comes off with the 2 set screws, it's easy to work on. And then this can be like a replacement part if you ever had a problem with this, the electronics inside. And the rear shock functions in a very similar way. And that was a very deliberate design decision. It was like, okay, let's decouple these parts so that we can still have our service. It's still easy. That's one of the things that people love about RockShox. We're good about giving service kits and making things easy to work on, and we want to do the same thing. Even though the flight attendant parts are the most complicated thing we've ever made, we still want them to be easy for people to work on. So that was kind of the idea behind, you noticed earlier that these things came apart like this, but that was the design direction for why they are the way they are. And then if we talk about this thing specifically, so this is the control module. So this guy is actually the brains of the whole operation, right? So that's where the algorithm, like when Joe mentions the algorithm, just so we're clear, the algorithm is essentially a computer program, right? It's running, it's what's making decisions. Inputs are coming in, the algorithm makes a decision and sends that back out to the fork and shock as to what suspension position to be in. And that all happens in there. So that guy really is the brains. It's the thing that you interact with, right? You guys, we taught you about the buttons and how to change all the modes. And it's super clean, lives just right on top of the fork top cap. And this thing, I'm actually really proud of this. This is probably one of the coolest things our ID department has ever come up with. And it's super simple, but it does a lot, and it's really easy to interact with, which is super cool. But this guy took us a while to get there, right? There was a lot of prototypes of this. I think Chris told a story earlier about riding with 3D printed prototypes of this on our bikes to be able to see if this was going to be in a bad location, see if it would get crash damage. And we rode around for months with these things on, and it was never a problem. So we're like, okay, that seems like a good place, because all of this was also based on that shared axis battery, right? We didn't want to make a specific battery for the fork and the shock. We want to have a shared battery that you can use with a derailleur, your seat post, or if you've got a road bike, you can use them with your road bike ETAP parts or the axis parts. So having that kind of shared axis ecosystem, we knew we had to accommodate that battery. So that's kind of a little bit of the form factor of this guy. And I told you guys on the trail, but kind of the way that the battery comes down, this thing was designed to clear any frame that has a straight down tube and maybe would have an interference. This thing will swing under that down tube, so it won't have any contact issues with the frame. So this thing was quite the challenge, and we're super proud of it. But it really is the brains and kind of the central hub of all of this stuff is the control module here.
Does that mean that you could say you did have an issue with that and it was removed from the fork, you could still ride the fork as is, everything functions totally fine?
For sure, yep. So the system is smart in that it knows if there is a problem. So with the three parts, the three flight attendant parts, so the pedal sensor, the rear shock, and the fork, it knows that there's a problem with one of them. So there could be, a problem, whatever. It could be an electrical problem. It could be a dead battery. It could be all sorts of things. Well, actually, not very many things. Mostly a dead battery. But and it's able to sense that, and it puts it in what's called safe mode. You guys didn't see that because we didn't have any problems in the 2 days. But basically, you get yellow blinking lights on the fork, and it would say, hey, there's something going on. We can't make the system work. It would default the system to open. So you can just go on a normal ride, and basically you just need to troubleshoot and see, like, it's likely a dead battery. Could be the battery on the shock, the fork, or the one in the pedal sensor. So it's a way for us to kind of have a default to open and get you a safe ride down.
Sweet. Does the pedal sensor have a different battery in it then? Or?
It does.
Yeah.
So the pedal sensor, again, we kind of wanted it to be simple and easy to deal with. So it goes in through the non-drive side of the cranks. You use this little expander plug, and it tightens through the drive side bolt. And this thing's pretty slick, actually. So you take this thing off. I'll open it here in my hand. And so it's just a AAA battery that lives inside of there. This guy will last roughly 9 months. Your results will vary depending on your riding type and how often you're on the bike. But yeah, you just need to go, you can go to the 7-Eleven, get a AAA battery, drop that in there, and you're back up and running. So it shouldn't be something like maybe you do once a season.
Yeah.
So pretty easy for people to deal with, and it just kind of lives down there in its little waterproof case down in the spindle.
Speaking of batteries, like what is the kind of like anticipated lifespan for batteries on both fork and shock?
Yep, so that's a good question. So when early on in the project, it was a requirement that the system had to be able to be ridden for 24 hours continuously, right? So think of the 24-hour race. They're not as popular anymore. Rewind the tape 7 years ago, a little bit more popular, but being able to do that race, start and then finish with one charge of batteries was the goal. We actually we got better than that, but the interesting thing about it is the parts have slightly different battery lives. So as I mentioned, the fork is the brain, so it's a little bit more heavy on battery use, right? Because there's more power being used there, whereas the shock is really kind of more listening. It's taking in inputs, but it's not doing all that computational stuff that's going on in the fork. So its battery life will be longer. It's very similar actually to the seat post and the rear derailleur. The rear derailleur, that motor uses more energy to shift between the gears, where the seat post uses a little bit less. So normally we find that the rear derailleur and the fork is in the 20 to 30 hour range of ride time, whereas the shock and the seat post is in the 30 to 40 hour range. So a good healthy, like the battery life is long enough that I forget to charge the batteries. You're just like, oh man, I don't know, I haven't charged this thing in a while. Then you'll basically get a red light and you're like, oh, I guess I should charge it.
I mean, that's been my experience with the derailleur. Same thing.
Same. It's usually a while. Like, oh yeah, you charge it.
I should charge these.
Charge it.
And the cool thing is, since you do have that kind of differing battery life, if you do have a full Flight Attendant and Access bike, you probably have one of the other batteries that has power. So you can kind of maybe put one fresh one on the bike and circle some things around to kind of get you through a ride if you did have a battery die on the trail. So I do want to cover some stuff about the fork and the shock, but I also don't want to stray too far because that's kind of periphery to Flight Attendant, right? It is part of it, but it's not really related to the system. So I don't know if you guys want to like walk through what questions you might have, and then we get back to some of the other stuff that I want to make sure you guys know about.
I mean, that's totally cool. I mean, I guess first off is Flight Attendant, do you have to buy a fork and a shock that comes with it? You can't apply it to suspension you already have.
Correct. So, and that's a great question, because at launch, the plan is to offer Flight Attendant complete bikes in the market.
Okay.
So we've been, as I said, we've been working on this for a while. We obviously had to give the OE brands quite the heads up to be able to know this was coming, because there is some fit, not concerns, but the rear shock does have a slightly different fit envelope than our normal shocks. So they need to be aware of that. Actually, on your Trek, if you notice, there's kind of a slot on the down tube.
I was curious,
And that's to clear that shock.
Gotcha.
We told them in enough time that they were able to modify the tooling to be able to clear Flight Attendant. So, you know, we've been working with the brands for quite a long time to be able to, hey, this is what we're working on. You tell them the concept, we go ride, they ride prototypes, and then they kind of make the decision to spec the product. So at launch, we'll have complete bikes from 4 brands. So Trek is one of them, Specialized, YT, and Canyon. There'll be 6 bikes total from 4 brands that'll be available at time of embargo. So it's been a long time coming, working with these brands, kind of getting to the finish line. Yeah. But really the important part of it, and the reason we can't just offer forks and shocks, is that rear shock fitment, right? We need to be able to fit that shock on the bike. Some bikes it's a bigger deal, some bikes it's less of a deal depending on how it's mounted. But then also making sure that we've worked with them, we know their kinematic, their leverage curve, we're able to tune the shock correctly for the bike that it's going on, make sure that it's, you know, it works with their frame. And then the fork is kind of, you know, standalone. It has just one, there's no variant there. And then obviously we have a ton of different crank options depending on what they need for the bike that they're building. So to start, be complete bikes with Flight Attendant. We'll see what happens in the future. There's more brands coming. You know, we'll see how the aftermarket looks, if we can offer packages of forks and shocks that are tuned for specific bikes. But we'll see.
Yeah, that definitely seems like it adds a bit more complicated, just a little bit, but it's just more things to think about. Is that, you mentioned as more brands come on and you have more rear shocks that'll fit other bikes, the, you know, external adjustments like on that shock, I know there's rebound, but kind of the tune that it comes with for the bike is set for the bike, because, you know, you're left with kind of what the computer is setting it for.
Well, I mean, all of this stuff is all, you know, so we'll do pretty extensive testing sessions with all of the brands that are speccing, you know, Flight Attendant at launch, and then the ones that we're working with into the future. And so, you know, on the rear shock specifically, there's 3 variables they can tune. There's actually 4. There's the open tune, right? That's standard that we would do on any rear shock we do with a customer. And then air spring tuning. There's some new air spring options available with Flight Attendant on the Super Deluxe shocks. So those are kind of standard variables that they tune. And then for Flight Attendant, there's a couple options for the pedal mode, whether a soft or a firm mode, and they can choose that. And then there's 3 different lock tunes that they can choose. And again, a lot of that's going to be based on their leverage curves, also kind of the character of the bike that they want to build. Some brands are going to want a more aggressive lock, some are going to want something a little bit softer. So again, we've gone through all of that with the brands getting here. And there's actually, you know, since I'm talking about it, that Super Deluxe that it's bolted to is an all-new shock developed with Flight Attendant in mind. More rebound range than before, more clicks than we've had in the past, more air spring tuning options. So there's now a progressive air can and a linear air can. Again, trying to tune in for the leverage curve of the bike, and then again those tuning options for the pedal and lock tunes. So a ton of adjustability that the OE can work through. So it makes for a pretty complicated testing session. It's like, okay, what do you want it to feel like? Get kind of the open mode dialed, and then we start working through the rest of it.
Yeah, I think you noticed that the shock was new, just even like by itself, standalone.
Yeah, you can tell like it was structurally different. It's like the air can looked noticeably different.
Yeah. So again, like talking about, you know, wanting to bring our best technology as we launch Flight Attendant, right? So we've been working on this stuff for a while, and it's kind of on the rear shock side, and the fork I'll get into in a second. Like, it's kind of the culmination of all the stuff we've learned over the years, trying to pack it into what we're launching with Flight Attendant. So kind of diving into the fork side a little bit, like a lot of stuff going on here. So you guys rode Zebs over the last couple days. So there are some updates to the Zeb chassis beyond just the Flight Attendant damper and system. So you guys noticed the valves, the very first seconds we got the bikes out of the truck. So they do have what we're calling pressure relief valves on the back of the lower legs. Nice little addition to the system. They do have an all new air spring that we've been working on for a bit. Just kind of, again, working on all the stuff that we've learned over making air springs, and then we're calling this guy Debonair Plus. But really just trying to maximize the volumes, make sure that off the top feel is best possible, and then having great support throughout the rest of the stroke. The other thing I didn't hear you guys mention is the little B logo on the bottom of the fork plate. All right,
different rebound knob too.
Yep, different rebound knob. So again, new knobs to go with the fork. But so this little guy on the bottom, there's one on the damper shaft and one on the air shaft, is actually one of the coolest things that I've worked on in quite a while. So these things are called Buttercups. So
I like it.
These things, I think they really are a game changer as far as suspension technology. But what we've got inside these little housing are essentially 2 little rubber pucks. And so what we're doing is we're, you know, mounting, this mounts in the bottom of the fork, bolt comes through, and we're essentially mounting the bottom of the lower leg of the fork through rubber to the damper or air shafts. And what that does is filter out a bunch of that little vibrations that Joe talked about, those little vibrations before they make it up through the fork. We're actually able to eliminate about 20% of those little small bumps that you run over before they start making their way up through the fork. So a really cool thing that we've been working on for a bit, and excited to have people ride it. I think it really does help with the feel, gives you great traction at the front wheel, and just kind of, you know, eases this thing on your hand, right? You're running over all that little embedded rock, some of those baby heads we were running over, some of those small bumps just get eaten up by the Buttercups before they make it up through the shafts.
I like how that sounds.
Yeah, I was wondering what it meant. I saw it on there. I was like, oh, it's probably like an electronic thing or something. So is that rather than like a traditional rubber bottom-out bumper then?
Yeah, so we still have the bottom-out bumpers. We still need those for function, right? Because we need something to bottom out on. But there's 2 of them in there because there's one for each direction for the rebound and compression stroke.
Very fancy. Yeah, I definitely noticed, like, I don't know if I'll put this in because I've never ridden a Zeb before. Only ridden the other brand's bigger single crown fork, and I noticed, I think I was even mentioning that when we were riding yesterday, I'm like, yeah, like the initial off the top is so much smoother than what I've ridden. And I probably would go to it. And even just like little chatter. It's tough with the fork. Personally, I don't think I noticed maybe like hand vibration too much because it's changing so much. usually when you're, say, like on a fire road where you'd have a lot of that, I didn't notice it being like stiff by any means or too harsh, but the fork was usually locked out or in a pedal setting, so.
Yeah, I think as you ride it more, like you can almost kind of see the thing that I notice more as we get towards winter is like you'll get, or even like mud, people will they'll walk through mud and then the footprints will harden, right? So you'll be running over like small bumps that are like really hard, and that's the kind of stuff that these things are just like basically erases. So it's super cool stuff.
Yeah, that's by us. We have clay, and you get cows that go through it, and then it dries in summer. And I mean, usually it's like when you're on flat, you're not compressing because it's kind of so quick. It's more like flex you're feeling, it seems. So that would actually make sense.
Yeah.
Well, shoot, I need to keep this bike until next spring now. And I'll be able to
got to negotiate with Chris. So you guys rode the updated Zeb. We also have an all-new Pike and all-new Lyric that'll be coming with Flight Attendant as well. So all similar technology, similar air springs, the Charger Flight Attendant damper, Buttercups, pressure relief valves, all new chassis for both of those forks. We'll be launching with Flight Attendant as well.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. So I mean, basically just giving options. So as we look at the bikes, like I mentioned, there's 6 bikes. So let me do the quick math in my head. So there's 1 Pike bike, there's 2 Lyric bikes, and 3 Zeb bikes. So kind of a wide mix of travels and kind of intended use, all the way from kind of a trail bike all the way up to kind of these enduro bikes we've been riding the last couple of days.
I was curious if it would just be like an enduro specific application or what, or just the Zeb, or.
We kind of started there. Actually, at the time, there was no Zeb. Obviously, we were doing this in kind of Lyrics and Pikes at the time. But I think, in my mind, it does make the biggest benefit the more travel you have. You know, we were kind of talking about that yesterday out on the crest. Normally, if I was riding that bike on my own and I didn't have Flight Attendant, I'd probably bring my trail bike, right? It's fast, efficient, I can move quickly. There's not a ton of big hits out there. There are. If I need to, I just deal with them with my arms. But now, with Flight Attendant, I'm like, no, why wouldn't I just bring the Zeb bike, right? I just bring the big bike. Now it pedals like my trail bike, if not better, and I've got more travel, beefier tires, better brakes for all of that stuff that we rode over the 30 miles yesterday. So that's kind of like the cool thing about it. But if you do put it on your trail bike, it's amazing. You basically feel like Nino, right? You're like, I can go full gas all the time.
Well, it wasn't until we turned it off that became apparent. I was like, wait a minute, this thing pedals great, like it's fine. When we turned it off, I was like, oh, this is definitely a 170 mil bike. Like, it's definitely a big bike. And then, noticed it as soon as we turned it back on, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that epiphany was real. Like, it was after a descent.
We were kind of nitpicking. We were like, oh, I mean, I don't know.
It's all right. So you got to pick it apart a little bit. But for sure, like it, I mean, even when we rode on today, I would probably personally be on like a 120, 130 bike.
Yeah, totally.
And it would be super fun, but you gain, I feel like I gained some of the aspects that I like from those platforms. We can like really pump and carry speed. Like, you know, in the +2 bias for sure. Like that bike felt much more quick and nimble than any other enduro bike I've ridden. I know, I'm over there like, man, this new Slash is crazy. Like, maybe it's just the bike. But I mean, we did set up on the trail and, you know, like configured the electronics and all that stuff. Is there any difference in like how you might set your sag or just like simple things like that? I know we touched on a little bit today that, you know, when it's in the lockout mode, you're definitely riding a little bit higher, like in the shock. Is there any thought to that with like if a bike's designed around a specific sag and now the bike's pedaling a little bit higher in the travel? I don't know, what do you think about that?
I think the number one thing you want to set up your sag around the downhill performance, right? So we always want to, whenever we do any of the suspension setup, we basically have the system off. It's easy just to put it in manual mode and put it in open because we want to set the sag in what's kind of the neutral riding position, right? Anything from that is going to be a bonus, like that added compression that kind of raises you up. So yeah, I mean, obviously there are some bikes that they're tweaking their kinematic or they're doing certain things to make the bike pedal better. But then we still want to kind of use their recommendation for sag as our starting point, because that really is like, you know, shooting for 30% in the rear shock, making sure the fork feels pretty balanced to that. Like, that's just a good starting point. You know, we do have some test riders that ride a little bit softer setup when they're riding the system. Right now that we don't need the bike to kind of stand up on its own. We can have the suspension be a little bit softer. There's maybe some more tuning you want to do, make sure maybe some more volume spacers, make sure you're not bottoming out. But we have had a few guys, especially in our office, that are running a little bit softer, so you've kind of got a little bit more trophy truck feeling suspension on the way down, and then as soon as you start climbing or pedaling, it's like whoop, motors kick in, and then you've got a more efficient bike.
I didn't even think about that. That would be sweet.
I imagine that goes into with like certain manufacturers tuning, like you were saying, the open mode, and then working through the other ones. They could decide on a firm that lets it kind of sit in that spot.
Yep. Yeah, and like that's the thing. Some of the bikes we had the firmest lock tune, which is great, like kind of showroom feel. You know, maybe it's not as awesome on the trail because it's super firm, but if you know, some of the other bikes will have the next tune down, so it is a little bit more compliant when you're riding in the lock. And again, it kind of just goes to personal preference and the leverage ratio. So the interesting thing to think about, so this is for, you know, you put your thinking cap on for the future, or your tinfoil hat, whichever way you want to think about it. So think about if in a future world, electronic suspension is accepted as the norm, and now bikes don't have to be designed, the kinematic doesn't have to be designed to add pedaling efficiency. We now have a system that can add pedaling efficiency, then where can we go? Right? Does that mean that the downhill performance is even better when the shock in the system takes care of the climbing?
Yeah.
So that's the exciting part of me. It's like, okay, cool, we're here, it works, and people are excited about the performance, but like, it's what's next, right? And really seeing some of that will be acceptance. Does this become something that the standard mountain biker will want on their bike? I hope so, yes. And then it's like, okay, bike industry and bike brands, what can we do now that the suspension can take care of that for you, and we can, you know, design your bike to eat up rocks even better. So that's kind of the cool future world that I'm hoping, and we'll see if we get there.
Especially those shorter travel applications. I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Dang, I might have to lay down to think about that.
Put your special tinfoil hat on, dude.
I know we talked briefly about it, but is there any coil shock application in the future?
So to start, just air shock. So it's all based on the Super Deluxe Ultimate, the air chassis. We have some prototypes floating around of coil. We wanted to focus on air to start. Again, packaging constraints, things like that. So I won't say there won't be a coil option in the future, but not at start. You know, we think there's a lot of benefit to the system, and we're super excited about it, and we'll see where we could take it in the future.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Want to toss a question you got in there?
I
know, right?
It's like I got nothing.
I know. Well, that's awesome.
You were making lists. I want to hear what's on the list.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered a vast majority of it.
Passed on the trail when we weren't filming. Not thinking about it anymore.
Well, you know how it's switching between settings. A lot of that's from, you know, a mix of rider input, pedaling, but then also trail features and impacts you're hitting. If you're, you know, say locked out and you hit a square edge, what's kind of like the time for it to open up and like take on that compression?
So
I think people will be curious, you know, like if it's locking out my bike, what happens when things start to get rowdy? Do I have a split moment of needing to be aware of that, or like how immediate is it?
So just to start off with our test riding we've done, we've had 0 complaints about opening speed, and you know, people have never complained about, oh, you know, super harsh impacts all the time. Like, that's just not a thing. And part of the reason it's like that is because our system is predictive and it uses that rider input, because a lot of times if you're getting ready to hit something, you stop pedaling. We can see that you're stopping pedaling and open the suspension before you even hit the rock.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there will be times whenever you pedal into something and it is locked out, and in those cases the algorithm is making a decision to open up, go to pedal, or go to lock every 5 milliseconds.
Oh wow.
So we have the capability to make that faster, we have the capability to make that slower. 5 milliseconds was kind of the sweet spot that we found to get the best performance for the algorithm, and we feel like it does everything we need to at that update rate. So.
With that bias setting, does it change that timing, or does it kind of just change how much force it takes? Or?
No, so the bias setting doesn't affect the update rate of the algorithm at all. It's mostly, it's all just on tweaking the different parameters that makes the algorithm tick, if that makes sense.
Got you. Let's keep looking at questions then. I'm afraid to even open up Spomer's text.
We gotta do at least one Spomer question.
Here it is.
He actually didn't send that many. He must have been busy. I mean, I think a lot of his questions are to, like, you know, I think they're probably something in the future, but just like how smart can the system be? I don't think it's something we've touched on, but he's asking more so like, can it maybe like learn rider input like tendencies and make tweaks to that? But it sounds more so that it's making those decisions all the time, that it's kind of always updating to how you're riding on that ride.
So obviously I can say a little bit, but we have a laundry list of things that we want to do with it.
Sure.
And it doesn't stop here.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to be continually working on it, continually improving it. I love working on this project. It's definitely like a passion of mine, and as long as this guy keeps giving me the green light, we'll keep making it better. So
Sweet.
To me, it's like this is just the start, and you know, sky's the limit. So
Yeah.
Well,
No,
I would
sure.
say that the biggest thing is actually I had to put the brakes on these guys, right? Because they wanted to give everything under the moon, and it's like I actually wanted the user interface, the experience to be as simple and natural and easy to deal with without like, right? I pulled out the phone to tweak a couple things for you guys, but we didn't have to have phones. We didn't have to have all that, and I want the experience simple because I want people to just go ride the bike and experience it. And if things get it too complicated, then you're like, whoa, 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 I don't want this. I don't want to have to ring my phone. I'm not sure what you guys are trying to sell me here.
Yeah.
So I really want, like, you know, we did that on purpose yesterday where we made it really simple to set it up, put the covers over the fork modules, and then we went for a ride and didn't tell you anything on purpose. And that's kind of the basic version of the ride experience. That's what we want people to have that experience.
What was the thought behind having a light that's showing you which setting you're in?
Oh, everybody wants to know.
Only because the second we took the cover off of it,
Yeah, you couldn't
I
stop
couldn't
staring
stop
at
staring at it. And it was good for analysis in my head for different things, but if I was going out to ride every day, I highly doubt I would be looking at it that much. But yeah, well, what's the thought behind that?
There's a couple things. So one, you have to have some validation, right? Like, you want to know, okay, what mode am I in? Because that kind of, that triggers something in your head. You're like, oh, I was hoping it'd be in pedal or lock. Well, there's your visual indication. The other thing is like, is it working? Is it doing what we're saying it's doing? So that's what the lights are for. The thing, it's funny, it kind of, you go through waves as you ride it. When you first get it, you just want to stare at the lights. And you're like, oh, I think it was in pedal that time. And you're like, oh, you're looking, you're basically crashing into stuff. We've all done that, trying to stare at the lights. And then after a while, you're just like, okay, never mind. I'm not going to look anymore because I trust that the system is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and it's going to put me in the best position based on the information it had. So you stop looking at the lights.
Yeah.
So we actually have in the phone a setting we call dark mode. So you can turn off the LEDs. It'll only indicate when there's like a state change. So when it moves from, say, pedal to open, it'll blink the open LED once, tell you it made the change, and then turn the lights back off. So I ride it in that just because I don't care anymore. I know it's making the right decision. Also helps a little bit with battery life because we're not flashing the LEDs all the time. But it was really one of those things, like the early prototypes had some tiny little LEDs, and everybody was like, what mode is it? What is it doing right now? So we kind of made that more of a dashboard looking thing, so it was easy to indicate, easy to kind of look at and get a visual reference of what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, in the 2 rides basically we've done, learning how to kind of channel between each different setting and adjust things has been pretty like intuitive and easy. So
interface is pretty sweet. I mean, I was changing the low speed compression on my shock while rolling today, and I've never done that before successfully.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Pretty handy.
Yeah, once you learn the colors, it's pretty straightforward. Like once you know what's what, and we've got some cheat sheets that'll help with that, and like lots of, actually there's a really cool tutorial in the phone that can walk you through. If you ever forget what any of that stuff is, you can just pull up the phone and it gives you a full walkthrough of all that stuff. So the resources are there in case you forget what color does what.
Sweet. Shoot, we'll probably walk through some phone stuff, maybe. I mean, unless you want to highlight just certain things you can adjust via your phone so you're out on the trail. We'll probably go through some specific phone stuff after, but
yeah, I don't think we need to film the phone stuff.
I think I'll do that all on my own.
Yeah,
anyways.
you should play with it and just like, well, before we leave, we'll get the app set up on your phone and get the bike connected to it, and then you'll be able to do anything you want to it.
Sweet. Shoot. I don't even know. I mean, I think a question that I had coming into this, sort of assuming what we were going to be riding, is that this has been done prior, and that was, in my mind, definitely geared towards more like pedal efficiency. People are going to be riding shorter travel bikes and all of that, and it's definitely answered that question to me. This is geared not towards maybe like one discipline of riding. And we've been riding full-size enduro bikes, and they aren't feeling like full-size enduro bikes, which I think is part of the point.
Yep.
But so for just personally, like I enjoy that it's coming out and it offers a lot of options tuning it yourself. You can tune it to rider, terrain, all of that stuff, but then it's also not kind of just for like one type of mountain biking. Obviously the bikes that it's launching on, you're limited at the time being, but everything changes with time. So
yeah, and there'll be a lot more to come.
Yeah.
But I would say the fundamental like philosophy of Flight Attendant is we want to be an open, right? Open safe, open's comfortable, and what we want to do is use the system to give us reasons to move away from open, right? And that's what makes the enduro bike super fun to ride, right? We did some cool rowdy descents, and they felt like normal bikes, which is entirely the point. But then it's like, okay, we've gotten inputs from the rider, from the trail, let's go get that more efficient setting. And really, that's what we want to do. We want to have open, and then we want to have that pedal and lock available to add efficiency, but that's not the default. We want open to be the default because that makes the bike more fun to ride, more natural to ride,
Yep.
and then you just get the efficiency when you need it.
sweet.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been super fun. It's been very entertaining.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm glad you guys came out. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, and looking forward to hear what you say after you get some time on it at home.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to getting on more familiar trails and just kind of really just riding it even against what I've been on and all of that stuff. I think it'll be pretty cool. So
Nice.
right on.
Thanks for the time, guys.
Yeah, appreciate it,
Oh,
guys.
yeah.
Yeah.
For more information on RockShox Flight Attendant system, you can head to vitalmtb.com for the full review.